So, this father of a 5-year-old gets the shock of a lifetime when his sweet little 5-year-old kid asks him, "Dad, where do babies come from?" As you can imagine, this poor young dad almost had a heart attack. Do you want to know what happened? Stick around and I'll share the story with you. So one of the worst things that we can do as parents, as people, as communicators, anytime we want to engage in a conversation with someone, is assume that we know what the other person is trying to say. In doing so, we often get into really tough situations that are of our own creation. Remember the dad I was telling you about at the beginning of the video? Well, his 5-year-old comes up to him and says, "Dad, I have a question. Where do babies come from?" The dad turned bright red. He sunk in his chair. He was going through this whole process in his head of, oh my goodness, I knew I would eventually need to have the talk, but I didn't think it would happen so quickly. What do I tell my 5-year-old that is not going to completely destroy him and completely shatter his innocence, but that at the same time will be enough information for him to be satisfied? What do I say? How do I say this? Thankfully, in this instance, the dad stopped, took a deep breath, and said, "Hun, what do you want to know?" Well, turns out the little 5-year-old boy overheard his mom say to a friend that she wanted another baby. And the boy loved his mommy so much that he wanted to give her the baby as a present. So he was just wondering where he could get a baby to give his mom as a present. Well, when the dad heard that, he gave a big sigh of relief, composed himself, and said, "You know what, honey? Don't worry. Thank you for telling me. Daddy will take care of that. We'll give your mom that present." And that's all he had to say. The boy walked away happy and satisfied. He didn't really want to have the birds and the bees talk. He didn't need to know all this information. And thankfully, that dad stopped in time to think about asking the question and making sure that he really understood what it was that his kid needed to know so he could give his child the information he needed. Very often, like I said before, we get ourselves into very difficult situations and we get ourselves in a lot of trouble because we assume that we know what the other person really wants to hear. We come into these conversations, very often we're caught off guard in the conversations, and we just fall into this mode of assuming that we know what the other person means, that we really understand what the other person needs or wants. Well, I want to talk to you today about two little things. One is the danger of assumptions, and the second is the power of questions. The danger of assumptions and the power of questions. So here's what tends to happen. Somebody comes up to you and says whatever. And without realizing it, I mean, it happens so quickly and so instantaneously and so much without formal thinking, right? It's not conscious. It's a completely unconscious process. But we tell ourselves a story about why that question is being asked or why that comment was made, which lead us to make assumptions about what is happening. So let's say that you go to talk to your husband, right? And you're trying to tell your husband or your spouse something important that happened to you during the day. You just walk in the room and you say, "Honey, I have to tell you something." And you're really excited about this really important thing that happened. And your husband, your spouse goes, "Uh-huh." And they don't really pay attention. You immediately tell yourself the story, and it's going to depend on your experiences, what your relationship has been like in the past, and what else you might be working through, right? But you might tell yourself the story that your husband doesn't care, that they never care about what you have to say, that you always have to be the one to listen to their stories, but that when it's your turn to tell the story, they are never available for you, that they are not there for you when you need them. And then you get into this whole mode and you start becoming defensive, and then the conversation shifts from sharing something that was exciting to attacking them because they're never there for you, right? And it all starts with an assumption. What if instead of falling into this whole little rabbit hole of stories and of telling yourself all the horrible things, you stop for a second and you move into the second thing I want to talk to you about, which is inquiry, right? Asking questions. And instead of getting all upset and getting all worked up, you say something like, I'm sorry, hon, I have something to share with you, but is this the best moment? Right? Because that reaction of, might have been that he was distracted. You didn't warn him or her ahead of time that you needed to have a conversation, so they're not expecting you to come over with important information, right? And we can't anticipate that the other person is ready to drop everything just because you're ready to talk. So what about asking and saying, hold up, I'm making this assumption that they don't want to hear me, but what if instead there's something else going on? Let me see if I can get to the root of what is going on. And you ask, I have something awesome to share, but is this the best time? And you might find out that they just received bad news from work. Or you might find out that they were distracted because they were just looking at something funny. Or their favorite team might have just scored a goal and they might be like really deep into the game, which is something that they're allowed to do. Because we have our things that distract us too, right? So if instead of jumping into an assumption, we get into the habit of inquiring and trying to really figure out and understand what might be causing this reaction that is not the one that I really wanted, things might shift. Things might be completely different at the end of the process. So first, we need to become aware of what we're doing and our own stories, the assumptions that we might be bringing, the stories that we might be telling ourselves, and the things that we might be maybe even exaggerating a little bit. Because we all have the tendency to do this. Our spouse or our teen or our coworker doesn't listen to us once or twice, and suddenly they never listen to us. Or they react a way that was not anticipated once or twice, and suddenly they always overreact, right? So we tend to take it to the extreme, when in reality it might just be one or two instances. It might happen often, right? But it's not always, and it's not never. So we tend to go to these absolutes when they are not really that absolute. So just taking a step back, really thinking through, what am I assuming? What is it that I am believing at this point that is causing me to maybe bubble up some emotions that are not helpful at this point? What is the story that I'm telling myself? And then moving from there to, what questions can I ask that will help me not make things worse, but at the same time understand what is going on. So if you notice in my example, I didn't keep asking, why aren't you listening to me? Why aren't you interested in the things that I'm trying to say? Those why questions are very seldom helpful. I asked, is this not, or is this not the best moment? Or is this a good time, right? Because what that does is it gives them the opportunity to give you a quick yes or no, but it also gives them a chance to stop and say, wait a minute, is this a good time? And maybe tell me, or tell you, right? No, honey, I'm sorry, this isn't a good time. I'm really focused on the game. Or would it be okay if I finish watching the game? Or no, this really isn't a good time because I just got some really bad news from work. Or yeah, sure, hold on, let me put this aside so I can give you my attention. But that also gives them an opportunity to understand that you are expecting their attention, right? So what is the best question that you can ask? Is this the best moment? When would be the best time to share this with you? What do you think if we have a conversation after dinner? Would that work for you? Would it be better if I tell you now, or if we wait until the kids are in bed? Those types of questions will give you more clarity and will give them an opportunity to really give you the attention that you're craving and that you're desiring to have, right? So again, awareness and inquiry. The first two steps in having better conversations. Become really aware of the stories you're telling yourself. Stop and check your assumptions and see if you're bringing to the conversation something that might be unfair or at the very least untested. You don't know for sure that that is the case. And then with inquiry, give your partner, the other person you're trying to have a conversation with, the opportunity to be present for you, to understand what you're expecting, and at the same time let you in on whether or not they are ready, they are in the best position to be having these conversations with you. I hope you have found this helpful, and if you have, make sure you're subscribing to my YouTube channel, and also check out my new podcast, Sincerely Speaking, which is available on all the major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I will see you on the next video. I'm Marcy Amaro, and until then, continue sharing and continue having those tough conversations in a productive way.